Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Last night, in a surprising turn of events, US President Donald Trump announced a 90-day pause on the country-specific tariffs he had previously imposed under his reciprocal tariff system. Now, this pause excludes China, where tariffs have been increased to a whopping 125%. Now, this sudden U-turn came just hours after the tariffs were initially enforced, leaving the global trade landscape in flux. Now, what impact could the unpredictability of US tariff policies have on global trade, and how should Malaysia and other ASEAN economies respond to safeguard our regional interests? Well, joining me on the show today to discuss this further, I have Professor Shandre Thangavelu, who is the head of the Jeffrey Cheah Institute on Southeast Asia at Sunway University. He's also the trade advisor to the Cambodian Minister of Commerce. Prof. Shandre, thank you so much for being on the show with me today. Can I get your initial assessment of Donald Trump's decision to pause the country-specific tariffs, except for those in China? Do you perceive this to be a tactical move to open negotiations, or does it indicate a broader shift in US trade strategy?
Thank you, Melisa. It's an interesting question, a very interesting question. I will say it's not that he has given us time, but he has taken some time to decide what he wants to do, giving the 90 days pause. Although the message is still on it, because he increased the China tariffs above 104 to 124. Basically, it means that China has imposed 84% tariff on US goods. And in addition, they also impose capital controls and tariffs on rare minerals, exports from China going to US itself. So there are more deeper implications from both sides. And fairly, it means that there is some grace period for us to consolidate our views and our strategies from the ASEAN perspective itself, and also the other countries, how they're going to manage some of these things.
Right.
So what are the strategies and what are the implications of what Trump has done? So the first thing is Trump has abandoned the global trading rules, and he completely abandoned all rules that manages global trade. So that's number one. So and what that implies is that we cannot go and talk to Trump on a rule-based trading dimension. So he has shifted all the bargaining component in trade negotiation more towards the US. Why? US is the largest consumer market in the world, so-called the number one global market. It's a consumer market. Conversely, East Asia is the number one supplier market in the world. So we call ourselves the second, China, the second largest economy, because we supply. And now that doesn't mean we don't demand. So what Trump has done is abandon this idea of trade, because trade is based on a very simple principle. It's a principle of differences. As long as differences exist, we can produce at the frontier, use all our resources efficiently, called comparative advantage, and able to consume beyond our production possibility. That is trade. And that's why it's very, very strong when we embrace trade and use trade for growth, because US, by right, is much more better off with trade. A good example is consumer market. So they're able to consume their goods at a much more cheaper rate than what they can actually consume. So fairly, when we open up, and like the ASEAN LDCs, fairly they will trade from their surplus labor. That is called catching up phase. So they have a lot of labor, so they produce labor-intensive goods, and to keep the price down for consumption for the US.
Right.
So in that sense, US overall welfare is much more higher than if they produce by themselves. So as we've used up our surplus labor, called Lewis turning point, Then we move to the second stage of production. That's where the ASEAN 5 or 6 countries are. Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, and Philippines are in the second stage where they start creating more value called dynamic comparative advantage. The last stage is the unbundling of skills. The third stage, unbundling. Singapore is into that, Korea is into that, and then we start pushing the trading frontier itself. So the whole trading framework, which we call the global trading architecture, is based on this principle of bringing this cohesion and a rule-based trading dimension among the 3 different components. So the interesting part of the global value chain is every country can participate and position in any of these components. If you have the 5 key fundamentals, forward-looking institutions, technology, infrastructure, and connectivity, and human capital. So what has happened with ASEAN and East Asia is we have moved the second frontier, and we're shifting closer to the third frontier, that is unbundling our skills. The future skills framework and so on, Singapore has embraced, and the human capital training and so on, where ASEAN is embracing, and our AEC 2045 is all based on this principle of pushing the next frontier itself.
Right.
And what has happened in US, the frontier, the ability to push the frontier become much more difficult. So that means their ability to create a dynamic comparative advantage become weaker over time. So their bargaining position is weakened from that dynamic perspective. The dynamic bargaining position from East Asia, driven by the trade liberalization of China and Korea and Japan together with ASEAN, be able to manage this transformation much more faster. They're catching our pace. So if US abandon their ability to be the major consumer, then we see the production frontier is shifting downwards. And this is what we are experiencing now. Because if US doesn't want to be the frontier consumption frontier, then by imposing this tax called reciprocal tariff is a tax. So what Trump is saying is come to my economy and invest in my economy or consume my goods. But for that to happen, for me to go to US to produce, they have to put the right fundamentals. What are the fundamentals? Infrastructure, human capital, technology, access to many of these things, including labor costs. Labor cost is very, very high in US.
Yeah.
Productivity is also equally important. So for me to move into US to produce this, any multinationals will be quite hesitant. So it's forcing us to get into that space, which US itself is not investing in the fundamentals. When you look at the data itself, 1% of the population controls 21% of the wealth. That's a recent World Bank data set. The inequality is widened in US itself, which basically means that there are a lot of inequality and a lot of unbalance within the domestic economy itself.
Right.
So it's a very important challenge for us to move there and invest in US. So what multinationals have done, use this framework and break down their production to increase their efficiency so that we can move our technology frontier, space technology, smart technology, and even AI. All these technologies are coming out at the same time managing the cost of production and be efficient in the whole production process called the global production value chain. So how US is going to position in the value chain is going to be important. So, which basically means that what is that I'm going to produce in US? But US is producing at a high-end value-added part of the value chain. Procurement, warehousing, services, they are much more higher in those frameworks, including R&D and so on. So only the low end is where we are, ASEAN and some of the ASEAN LDCs are. So from his measure of trade deficit, every country who are in the first phase will export more than what they can consume with respect to US. So using that measure itself is marginalizing and punishing an LDC for being part of this framework.
I understand. Can I ask you about Cambodia? Because you are in your capacity as trade advisor to the Ministry of Commerce in Cambodia, I'm curious to know, Cambodia was hit with the highest tariff rate, wasn't it? 49% was the levy that was upon Cambodia. So can I ask you, from the perspective of Cambodia, how then should Cambodia strategize to navigate the evolving tariff landscapes? You said this is a grace period for many countries. So what should be done during this grace period, particularly for countries like Cambodia, economies like Cambodia, economies within ASEAN?
The small countries cannot go and negotiate with a larger country because it has abandoned the global trading rules. So the whole idea of global trading rules by WTO is to protect small open economies and economies to negotiate on a rule-based trading area. So when you abandon that, there is no negotiation point for you. That means you will be brought down to the corner solution, and the larger economy like US is going to extract a lot of surpluses from you. Will bring you right to the corner, right to the end point where I extract. So from a small open economy point of view, most ASEAN, not just Cambodia, most ASEAN LDCs don't have a lot of degrees of freedom to negotiate. Negotiate a larger economy. So fairly we need to gravitate to ASEAN coalition. ASEAN as a group need to negotiate and put the framework that is required. Because ASEAN itself is not just a trading bloc and economic cooperation, but also have this set up the rule-based trading area, which is the fundamental component called ASEAN centrality that underpins most of bilateral, multilateral, ASEAN +1, even ASEP itself. And that's why we are the long enduring trading bloc in the world. So ASEAN need to handle this from a very coalition point of view, not allow individual members to negotiate. If individual members negotiate, under ASEAN framework, it is allowed. So they can go and negotiate. But ASEAN still need to put out a joint statement that the coalition is important because of the centrality. It's not just they have to manage US. They also have to manage China. There are a lot of political issues surrounds us in the region itself. So using the geoeconomics statecraft to manage the geopolitics become very important for ASEAN centrality itself. And that's how ASEAN was formed in 1967, to manage the geopolitics around us using the geoeconomics itself. So that is the key fundamental that we need to hold on to. And ASEAN LDCs have to gravitate to this. They can negotiate individually, but they need to have clear strategies, intellectual property rights, NTMs, non-tariff barriers, and rules of origin. So that means countries, when they export, they have to show the local content itself. It's not just tariff. To actually assess the zero, whatever zero or whatever I want to give to them, or whatever US is giving to them. So that's why we need the rule-based global trading area and emphasize this. So I believe ASEAN will make that statement soon, that the consolidated response will come from ASEAN, I believe, and I'm strongly hopeful that it will be a defensive position. So what is defensive means? I'm not going to retaliate. Retaliation is not the right strategy for us. It will be a defensive. So, for example, now Trump has taken a defensive position. That means he said, okay, I give 90 days grace period. It's a defensive position. Initially, he went on an offensive position. So now he's becoming very defensive and defend his position. So ASEAN need to do a defensive position, consolidate and hold on to whatever that's been created within ASEAN and in the region in a very constructive manner. What is constructive means? It means that we emphasize new technologies. We emphasize AI, emphasize green trade and green economy, digital economy. These are the things that's going to make us more competitive and consolidate ourselves to that equilibrium that will manage US itself. At the same time, we need to focus on ASEP. The interesting part of ASEP is the largest global trading area globally. We control 30% of the population, 30% of the GDP, nearly 30% of the investment, and nearly 30% of the global trade itself. So fairly, we have the RCEP that came into force in 2022. So we need to go back and consolidate this dimension of the RCEP itself. So very important to emphasize that we have, RCEP has 22.8 billion people. So if we are not a supply side of this global trade, we actually has the demand side. So that is our potential to create the demand side and create the demand and supply and create intra-RCEP trade and intra-ASEAN trade. Intra-ASEAN trade is very low, within ASEAN itself. So again, there are many, many dimensions potential we have to actually enhance. So the ample opportunity now for us that Trump has abandoned. Then the question is, what is the framework we want? And the framework we're going to see, I believe, that is emerging faster once US abandoned its rule-based, is multipolar system, trading system. So what you will see, multipolar trading system already emerged. For example, you have the European Union. European Union is a union that institutions has converged and they follow the rules. That is one polar. And then we have ASEAN. ASEAN itself is an economic cooperation and embedded in the RCEP itself. Rule-based trading area. 30% of the global trade we're going to control. Then we are hoping that US together NAFTA will form the other group. But that has collapsed. That has collapsed with Trump itself. So North America and Latin America have to decide how they want to form that group. That means each group will have its own rules, and then we're going to trade among ourselves.
Yeah, this is so interesting, Prof. Shandre, because the Singapore Prime Minister Lawrence Wong, he alluded to this in his speech about the tariffs. He said the era of rules-based globalization, free trade is over. We're entering a new phase, which is arbitrary, protectionist, and dangerous. If we're going to see the global trading system break up into these fragments, how will Southeast Asia be caught in the middle? And I know you said that we have RCEP and we can align to some of these markets that we already have. We can leverage on that or optimize the potential of it. But if we are seeing a deeper economic decoupling of major powers, could Southeast Asia get caught in the middle, the crossfire, and would it be to our detriment as smaller middle power economies?
Not really. Not really. The first statement is that the global trading framework has broken. It's not really true. In fact, when you look very closely, the multipolar system that the European Union holds and the multipolar system that RCEP holds is based on WTO principles. So what is WTO principles? That means within the bloc, whoever we give will give to everybody. So under WTO principle, if you are a member, if I give a very zero tariff rate, for example, to US, I must give to every member. But that exception is only managed when you have a free trade agreement, like a multilateral agreement. So then we are allowed to give preferences for the big bloc itself. So it's not that the global trading rules has collapsed. In fact, it has been consolidated and become stronger because rules are meant for bargaining. No? So we have European Union and ASEAN. So European Union and ASEAN will form a free trade agreement. We are already negotiating that. No? So two blocks comes together, and then we have a proper trading arrangement within ourselves, rule-based, dispute settlement, IP, and rules of origin. Everything is there. But within the bloc, we have more liberalization itself. So ASEAN Southeast Asian countries are not going to be marginalized. The only way they're going to be marginalized if they give up the ASEAN centrality. As long as they have the ASEAN centrality that holds them together under our free trade agreement, after AFAS is the free trade in services, and AKIA is the agreement in investment. Together, the ASEAN Economic Community that's Malaysia is going to launch in 2045. ASEAN 2045 is going to be launched in ASEAN Chairmanship. in Malaysian ASEAN chairmanship, fairly you're going to see the consolidation and the centrality of ASEAN in the dimensions I mentioned. Okay. So Southeast Asia is not going to marginalize. In fact, we will move to the next phase of important growth.
Prof. Shandre, Malaysia, you mentioned as chair, has a unique position and opportunity. It's a tough position to be in this year with all the challenges geopolitically and economically, but we have a position to lead ASEAN through this turbulent time. What would you like to see Malaysia do, prioritize, in terms of this strengthening of economic collective bargaining? What would you like to see in the coming weeks from ASEAN Chair Malaysia?
I think getting a consolidated framework and a consolidated mindset is important. It's not just a consolidated statement. The mindset means commitment. So fairly, ASEAN, the interesting part of ASEAN is when you put ASEAN in the corner, ASEAN responds very effectively. So in a normal time, you see a lot of ASEAN tend to be in different parts of the community itself. When you put ASEAN in a corner, ASEAN responds very well. So you put ASEAN in a corner and ASEAN will respond very effectively. And ASEAN Malaysian chairmanship will be the lead that's going to make this defensive, constructive statement, consolidation itself, which means that the constructive means that ASEP have to be enhanced. ASEP secretariat need to be coming into force. And ASEP is a living agreement. The living agreement means we are able to define and discuss many, many dimensions, including green, environment, and human capital development. At the same time, green digital economy will come into force together with skills development itself. So fairly looking and building up ASEAN from that perspective and supporting our bigger framework of the other 5 members that includes CJK, China, Japan, Korea, and Australia, New Zealand. Consolidating that will become very important. In fact, we have another opportunity called accession to ASEP. So when Trump pushes us to this corner, we can open up the session. That means it's not accession means that allow other countries to join because there are a lot of interest for other member countries to join. And this is how we're going to seek market and develop our market. So ASEAN, or ASEP, will become not only a supply side, but a demand side. And we have accession coming from other countries because now ASEP has allowed accession into ASEP itself. So we're talking about South Asia, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, or African countries, or even Latin American countries to join us. So instead of we worried about the collapse of the global trading area, we have enhanced ourselves to be a big global trading center itself.
Okay.
So Malaysia is in a very good place to consolidate this. Prime Minister, Malaysia is in a very good place to actually consolidate this and bring the leadership to ASEAN itself.
Okay. In the couple minutes that we have left, this is very encouraging, Prof. Shandre, but we still have that 90-day pause. And I'm wondering what indicators you're watching out most closely for to assess whether that pause in tariffs actually leads to stabilization or whether it could mean, or other indicators that could mean we are headed into further global shock.
Well, firstly, Trump has not abandoned a so-called reciprocal tariff itself. Honestly, I don't like the term Liberation Day. I think that is not a Liberation Day, actually. From a global trade perspective, it is not. But from whatever position Trump has taken, I already mentioned deficit is not the right measure to do this. That is very clear. Okay. So either there's no way any LDC countries is going to manage the deficit because that's not how trade and growth is about. Neither can I go and allow US economy to come and trade because ASEAN LDC like Cambodia is a very open economy. US can come and set up any of its production. But that's not going to manage the trade deficit itself. So as long as the trade deficit exists, Trump will use this as a means to manage the global trade itself. And second is punishing countries that are following the rules. So that means countries that follow the rules of the trade are being punished now. And third, he has put all the ASEAN member countries that are in the RCEP, close to China, in the top 20 list.
Yes.
Which basically means his political economy is very clear.
Yeah.
I can go and give him zero interest rate. He will ask me to get away from China itself.
Yes.
So again, the geopolitics is hitting us much more than what we can. So the 90 days grace period, already mentioned, ASEAN need to make a consolidated statement. A defensive statement, not a retaliatory statement. Not an offensive, but a defensive statement that we're not going to retaliate, but this is our position. Consolidate and into RCEP, into technologies, into green technologies, human capital development, and enhance our RCEP itself.
Okay.
So that is how we're going to manage this. So I believe Trump will hit us before the 90 days. All he's watching is the stock market. If the stock market recovers in the next 10 days or 15 days, you're back into the same element. So again, for us, we need to manage the geopolitics because as Trump put this, we also have the other countries like China, also very important in our geopolitics itself. Yeah. So ASEAN centrality is very key.
Prof. Shandre, thank you so much for speaking with me. I appreciate your time. Professor Shandre Thangavelu there, wrapping up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.